Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Learn from the Experts video series. My name is Jonathan Sparling with Private College 529 Plan, and today we're talking all about the CSS profile. Joining me today is Shannon Amundson. Shannon is the Director of Financial Aid at Colorado College, and she's going to be answering some questions about the CSS profile and giving you some good pieces of advice. So, Shannon, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here and answer questions.
So Shannon, before we get started, I thought it'd be great if you could just tell our viewers a little bit about Colorado College.
Sure, I'm happy to. Colorado College, or what we call CC, is in Colorado Springs, which is a town of just over 700,000 people. We're a 5-minute walk from downtown, and we're very connected to all that the city has to offer. We're very connected to the natural world around us. We're right next to Pikes Peak and all the hiking you could ask for. Our 2,200 undergraduates on campus are intellectually curious, think critically, and learn intentionally. We have small classes. They're capped at 25, but our average from start to finish is 16 students in a classroom. And we do teach it differently. So CC is on what we call the block plan. You take one class with one professor at a time. Classes run Monday through Friday. 9 to noon is our normal hours, but with labs and things like that, you may have afternoon classes. You have 8 blocks a year. Each one is 3.5 weeks long. And at the end, you get your credit, you get your grade, and everything is complete for that class. Nothing is lingering. You take a couple of days off and you can venture into the mountains, serve in the community, or just rest. A lot of our students enjoy that time off. Students immerse themselves in that class. There's no rushing off to the next class or the next thing. Our students get to fully embrace the courses that they take. 80% of our student body studies abroad during their time with us. The block plan is really conducive to study abroad. There's no conflict with other classes. We also work with the Quad Initiative, identifying global problems and solutions to those problems. We have clubs and religious and service groups and cultural groups, Greek life, Division I, Division III sports. It's a very active campus. And we have students from all over the country and all over the globe. We have students from many, many countries, as well as every state in the union. And we hope that you'll connect with CC if you're, as the people viewing this and looking at private colleges, we think we're a great option to start looking at.
That's great. Thank you, Shannon. And I love, kind of the block classes and being able to kind of fully immerse. I know that that's, certainly unique and something that you said many students really benefit from. And I, at the end, a lot take the rest. That's great, right? It's kind of take the time to relax. I can imagine pretty intensive. So, Shannon, what is the CSS profile and how does it differ versus the more common financial aid form, the FAFSA form that I know many folks are probably more familiar with?
Yep. So the CSS profile is a privately organized form. So it is run by a private company, but it is based more in economic principles and different things than the FAFSA. It asks for all of the family's resources. And then it uses economic principles based on the college going population. How much are those families making? How much are those families spending on medical and housing and things like that? So it's much more rooted in an economic principle model, and it will have more questions for that reason.
So, why would a college and why does Colorado College use the CSS profile? And I know you alluded to this a little bit already, but how does the college use the information submitted on the CSS profile when making financial awarding decisions?
Yep. So colleges there's a largely a difference between schools that meet need, although that's not 100%, just like you said, Jonathan.
Mhm.
Some public schools use it, but schools that meet full demonstrated need are schools that generally use the CSS profile because we have a full picture. And
Sure.
so, right, if we want to be able to use our resources, which are still limited, to help
Mhm.
as many families as we can and treat as many families as we can equitably, right? So we want to look at all resources, not just some of them, and make sure that we're equitably treating all families. We do use all income, right? So if a
Mhm.
family is receiving some sort of untaxed benefit, right, we count that the same way we would count taxed income that's earned from work or from a business. And so we use all of those things to fit you to determine what a family can afford. We also ask on the CSS profile if you have abnormally large medical benefits,
Mhm.
or if you are paying for private high schools. If you So we ask more questions about your expenses, which is designed to help. It's not designed to be, I know that it's annoying, but it's not designed to be, right? It's designed to really let us see a full picture of what a family is bringing in and what's going out, and where they have choices to help fund a student's education, right? A family who's living on $25,000 total income into a household with 4 people doesn't have a lot of choices. But
Mhm.
another family might have more choices because of how much money they're bringing into the house, even though it's an untaxed source.
Mhm. Yeah, so you mentioned, that full picture, kind of the advantage of the CSS profile is that it's collecting both kind of all sources of income, but it's also diving a bit deeper into some of those expenses that a particular family might have, which might not necessarily be reported in other forms. So it's kind of utilizing both from the income side, the resource, but then also the expenses that a family might have.
Absolutely. We think it's important to not just look at one side or the other. You have
Sure.
to look at the big picture.
Yeah, absolutely. For anyone watching, if this is the first time that they're preparing to complete the form, so we know that largely the form is completed by hopefully a combination of the student and parents, right? We kind of encourage the family approach to when at all possible with completing financial aid forms. So if a parent or student is preparing to complete the CSS profile for the first time, what can they do to prepare? Are there any special documents or resources that they should have handy in order to make the completion process more quick or
Yep.
timely?
So I would say the things to make sure you have are the tax forms for the year that they're asking for, and make sure that you have your full tax return, not just the first page, right? But all the schedules, because it's going to ask you things from there too. So make sure you have all of that. Any W-2s that match
Hmm.
to that tax return, any investment statements that you have, and you're going to use the most recent investment statement you would have. So if that's a investment account, a mutual fund, whatever that is, bank
Hmm.
statements, make sure you've got all of those sort of pulled together so you know what that is. If you own any other investments, rental properties, second homes, things like that. You're going to want to know how much that's worth and what the debt is. And you're going to be asked that about your primary home as well. Here's the key: no school's asking you to go out and get that house appraised. Not at all, right? If you report that your house in Southern Illinois is worth $150,000, that's probably going to make sense. If you report that your house in San Diego is worth $150,000, we're probably going to question that, right? So it's about reasonableness, right? So
Hmm.
you need to reasonably know what that house is worth, and most families do. And so
Hmm.
we're not asking for anything crazy, just make sure that you have those details. So that's going to give you all of the information that you would need. Then at the end, it's also going to ask you, is there any special circumstance that we should be knowing about, right? Is there anything you haven't been able to tell us on this form that you want us to know? Now, that
Hmm.
might be we've lost our job due to COVID.
Hmm.
I had a spouse who passed away. We have a sibling with ongoing medical. So yes, we reported our medical, but that's never going to let up.
Hmm.
Right. So things like that. So it's going to ask you for things that maybe aren't reported on your taxes in such a clear way. So if there's anything like that that affects your finances, be sure to have some of that pulled together as well, so you can put that and submit that to the schools.
Great, great, perfect. And one of the having worked in financial aid myself, I think that the the area where you can report some of those special circumstances, I think is particularly important, right? And I think you kind of alluded to, it's asking for, the form itself asks for more information, but still there's some things that it may not ask for, and so that's where that special circumstances, that free, it's essentially a free right, and you
Yes.
can kind
Yep.
of put some information there.
Free form text, whatever it
Yeah.
is that's affecting your finances that you want the colleges to know, you should put in there.
So the family goes through, completes the CSS profile. Let's say they're applying to um, 5 schools altogether, and 3 of them use the CSS profile for, they're 3 private schools, and they all use the CSS profile. After they submit the form, what
Mhm.
happens? Is it going to every school? Is it going, kind of, what happens
Yep.
with that process?
So at the end of filling it all out, the form does say that you're required to put what schools you want to submit it to. So you would put all 3 of those schools that in your example, Jonathan, that had the
Hmm.
CSS profile required. Now, if you submit to those 3 and then, your child finds a school that wasn't on the list, was never on the list, but now has moved up the list, and you need to submit that late, you can always log back into that CSS profile and release it to a new school. No problem with that whatsoever. So don't panic if you don't put somebody on there right away. Once you hit submit to the schools get a download file every night
Hmm.
of whatever was submitted to them the day before. We import it into our system, and then we get to review that. Many schools who require the CSS profile do ask for full tax returns and W-2s to be submitted to them. So part of why you pulled those out to fill it out was because now you're going to need to submit them, odds are, to your school that you're applying.
Hmm.
And so make sure to upload those. We're going to take those and compare, just make sure that everything got filled out correctly. We don't have any questions. Nothing looks off. If there is, we'll reach out and ask. And then every school has their own formula for determining what that family contribution is, right? So
Hmm.
some schools don't look at all at retirement. I think most don't. Some
Right.
schools might. Some schools will look at second home and maybe
Hmm.
not count the equity. Other schools are going to count that and say, right, that's a family choice that you don't have to make to carry a
Right.
second property. So that equity becomes part of an investment pool. And so every school is going to have their own rules. That's
Hmm.
the benefit to the CSS profile for the schools is we can put our priorities where we want them to, as opposed to the FAFSA, which dictates that, right? So
Sure.
so that's why you'll get packages from some schools that are vastly different, even though you submitted the same information. It's simply because they choose to look at it differently. And so that's important to note so you don't think, well, they must have gotten bad information. They looked at something differently, and it's totally appropriate to call and ask why
Hmm.
it's different. But that's what it's likely from.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a really important distinction because, the when you're submitting to different schools, and we have these conversations all the time, you might think, even if they're schools with similar costs of attendance, right? Like,
Mhm.
even if it's not that this ever really happens, but if you had 3 schools all with the same cost of attendance, all use the profile, you submit the information. I think if families going through it for the first time, they might think like, oh, the package will probably be the same from all 3, and that's just not the case for the points that you mentioned about resources and kind of what the school is designated in terms of potential financial aid to give out, the class, kind of a host of factors.
Yep, absolutely. So it's just important for families to know that that's not and that's why the FAFSA at the end will kick out what currently they call an estimated family contribution. They're changing that, but let's use that for now. It kicks it out at the end because there's only one formula.
Right.
Schools can't change it. The profile doesn't do that because
Hmm.
every school has to run it against their own determination. And so you're not going to get that family contribution at the end like you do with a FAFSA. And that's
Right.
intentional.
So family submits profile, they go through, they're going to hear from the school. What happens in year 2? Does Colorado College require you to submit the profile every year? How does year 2 work?
Yes. So
Okay.
most schools do require the profile year after year. So you'll fill it out 4 times total by the time
Mhm.
you're done, and submit 4 years of tax returns, the same as the FAFSA. And so it's really a redo of the process. The benefit
Right.
right now, when they went to earlier release of the FAFSA and the profile also released early, is that you can start it in October. And
Mhm.
so schools have lots of time to get those reviewed, and parents have lots of time to get them submitted, because you can start in October for your student to come back the following August, right? So you want to do it as early as you can and just get it off your plate, and then the school can get your student awarded as soon as possible.
Okay, that's great. And then that coupled with, as we've put in other, and I think parents know, it's also coupled with the prior year income
Mhm.
information. So you kind of have that advantage of not only is it open earlier, but you're using two prior year income
Right,
information.
and you have the taxes done, right? That's
Hopefully,
the benefit. It used to be you could fill it out with estimates, then you'd have to update
right,
it, right? Been around long enough to remember the bad old days. Now you just fill it out and you're done.
right,
So
right.
huge benefit.
Absolutely, certainly streamlines the process. Um, well, Shannon, this has been super helpful. Thank you for your time. Before we let you go, any last words of advice for, particularly families who may be going through the process for the first time, completing the CSS profile? Any last words of wisdom?
Yeah, a couple things. One, if you run into a brick wall and you're not sure what you're supposed to be answering with, call one of the schools that you're working with.
Mm,
They are happy to help you answer it. They would much rather you call before you're in tears, you're so frustrated, than if you wait until that's where you get, right? We've had families do both. We'd much rather answer the question. So don't hesitate to reach out if that's you're running into a problem. And the second piece is, and this isn't really profile related, but outside scholarships are a great resource for students. Here's the reality. Students need to apply before they get their financial aid award letters and know if they need more money. And so a lot of those deadlines open early fall, and you aren't going to know if what your student's award is going to look like until January. A lot of deadlines have passed. And so just want to make sure that that's on everyone's radar to apply early. And the other thing is that it's simply a numbers game. The more you apply, the better your shot is, right? So,
mhm,
my little example was I had a student who applied and she was really upset. She only got one scholarship. She'd applied for 100, but the scholarship was $5,000. If you figure she kept her essays, she put an hour into each application, that was $50 an hour. And when
mhm.
you put it like that, students tend to be willing to do more of the work than just focusing on the rejection letters, which are inevitable. And so just want to put that out there for families who say, well, you apply for everything, you only get one. That may be true, but that doesn't mean it's not worth your time. So something to consider as you're looking at the college process.
That's fantastic. And, I think both pieces of it call, if you run into frustration, schools want to help. And scholarships, absolutely. Yeah. And I love that you broke it down to the per hour rate, because it's, time is money. And I think that it's important when you kind of break that down that way. And we know how busy students can be. Um, Shannon, thank you once again. We appreciate the time and the advice. Colorado College is obviously a member of Private College 529 plan, and we are excited to continue to bring you these Learn from the Expert video series to help you along your college planning and financing path. So, Shannon, thanks again, and we'll see you all at the next one.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.